Hey everyone, we might get started. So thank you so much. Hello and welcome. My name is James Arvanitakis and I'm the Director of the Forrest Research Foundation. Welcome to Forrest Hall, the home of the Foundation. So I'd like to begin by respectfully acknowledging the past and present traditional owners of this land on which we are meeting, the Whadjuk Noongar people. It is a privilege to be standing on Noongar country. And I just want to say something that Paul and I have been saying a lot lately, and that is we say our acknowledgement to country not because we have to, but because we want to. We want to be part of a long tradition and acknowledge this incredible history of this land. It is a pleasure to welcome you here to Forrest Hall, home of the Forrest Research Foundation, and the place where many forest scholars and researchers live, and we form a special community, and some of them are here today, which I'll have a chance to introduce you to in a little while. Harvard professor and the father of sociobiology, E.O. Wilson, once stated, "The real problem of humanity is the following. We have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. It is terrifically dangerous, and it's now approaching a point of crisis overall." Wilson wrote these words over a decade ago, and the world has changed a lot since then. We sit at a crossroad. Do we harness the technology in front of us, or do we become victims of it? Do we learn to apply it, or do we let it outmarch our brains, diminishing our capacity to address the world's most pressing challenges? To overcome this threat, and we need to engage deeply in these questions, not to panic and say it is the end of the world because of artificial intelligence, nor celebrate such technology that they'll solve all our problems, and that we will once solve every disease, every conflict, everything that's ever challenged us through AI. We can only do that through deep engagement, as I said. And such conversations is exactly why the Forrest Research Foundation was established by Andrew Nicola Forrest. It is about bringing together researchers from around the world to come live here in Forrest Hall, discuss, debate and challenge big ideas. And it is why we're always honoured to partner with the UWA Public Policy Institute to discuss in an open-minded way where we don't turn up with preconceived ideas, but we turn up with looking for something to talk about. Not to necessarily always agree, but to respectfully disagree, and through that tension find a working solution. We recently released an essay late last year called Pragmatic Idealism. That is, how do you keep your ideals but find pragmatic ways to work together? So today, we won't all agree on where we find ourselves, but mostly what we'll do is we'll hear four incredibly thought-provoking speakers who will challenge us, who will make us reflect on the challenges ahead, but also the opportunities. Thanks so much for coming along. I'm sure it's going to be a fantastic evening, and now I'd like to pass over to Associate Professor Paul McGinn to set the scene. Thank you.
Okay, so welcome everybody. Just to give you a quick context about this Policy Taboos series, when I met James, when I came into the PPI role, we kind of found a common thread in our kind of belief and commitment to ideas around kind of academic freedom. And we were thinking, well, how can we kind of pursue that and kind of engage with colleagues within the university and then the wider publics? And we came up with this idea of policy taboos, and we had a long list of topics that we want to kind of basically explore over time. And I suppose in the first quarter of this year, AI obviously has been, everywhere that we look, basically in the news, on your social media feeds and scholarship and so forth. And we come up with this idea of having a little series on AI, and this is the first in that series. So it's going to be a three-hander, but what we have in mind. So this one's about AI in the academy, broadly speaking, and our four speakers are going to kind of challenge us around that. And James and I have asked our speakers tonight to be provocative. We've asked them for provocations. So that kind of adds on to James's comment about, we're here to kind of push our thought and our imagination and our own positions on things as well. I kind of want to set the scene a little bit. I've just got a couple of quick slides, so hopefully this will work. So I was looking today, trying to organize a scene. So AI is all about trailblazing and trailblazers. And here's just a sample of the top 100, what Time defined as, you know, AI leaders, movers, shakers, and so forth. And some of you will be familiar with some of these names and some of the corporations. And I've tried to give a balance here in terms of males and females who are kind of leading the space, because, you know, we hear the word tech bros, but there's tech sisters involved as well, basically, when you kind of dig under the surface a little bit. And I kind of wanted to kind of pull some of that out. So, and you'll see there, I'll put the word AI and the word trailblazers. So I did a Google search today. I said, give me all the words that have AI in the middle of them. So all of these words come up, and that's kind of helped me frame my kind of little structure for tonight. So these are the trailblazers in AI. Okay. Now, this is a pop quiz, quick pop quiz. AI is the inconvenient truth of what? Can you interpret that image or that slide? Fundamentally, what is it all about? Who? What? Okay, somebody's got it, I think. Yeah, okay, so Claire, Ben, I told you I would get one laugh out of this. And there you go. 2, okay. Without saying it, has anybody else got it? 3.
Aging.
Andrew, 3. Gil, you've got it, don't say it. There's 4. Okay. So, it's about algorithms. That's Al Gore. Okay? So, now the question, I suppose, in a way, is this is Al Gore at a variety of different stages in his life. So, we're talking about diversity in algorithms, or are we talking about a standardization and a singularization of algorithms, basically? Okay? So, the provocations that I think our talk is going to talk about tonight, basically, our speakers are going to talk about, are probably going to center around a crisis in faith in AI, okay? And James mentioned the word crisis, and I did not know what he was going to say, but it just shows how in sync we are with one another with keywords. So here are the tech bros, the gods, the so-called gods of AI and the interwebs, and you know, kind of their status. But at the same time, I think our colleagues tonight are also going to kind of be looking at pursuing fairness in AI as well. And I think that this is where the tension really is, you know, whether it's in academia, the use of AI in the academy, its implications for the academy, but also in our daily lives, and also in the economy and industry, and democracy itself as well. So, and here are just kind of, I suppose, I picked 4 people who are kind of in this the pursuit of fairness in AI, or questioning fairness in AI, and that's going to certainly be, you know, at the heart of at least one of the presentations tonight, and it'll probably be in the discussion. So, the way things are going to work tonight is I'm going to invite our speakers up to the stage, and I'm going to do that right now, and they're going to sit in order of speaking. So, it's Julia, Paul's here, like. See, the AI made them do this. All by themselves, they figured it out. So the order is basically going to be, each speaker will has 6 minutes to put forward big thoughts and big ideas around the theme that they've put forward to us. At the end of each person's presentation, I will invite one question while we have an interchange from the audience. There are rules. One rule, actually, it's not even rules, it's a singular. Your question must be a question and short. The speakers have also been advised that their response must be short. So it equally applies to them as it applies to you, okay? And then we'll move on to the next speaker, and we'll have another question. When they finish, we'll ask another question from the audience. I want to try and get around the room so that everybody gets a chance to try to kind of speak, basically, okay? So, without further ado, I'm going to take my seat over here, and I'm going to invite Professor Julia Powell.
Just leave that behind you. That's
Sorry.
yeah, that's okay.
So she doesn't.
Julia is the head of the Tech and Policy Lab here, and Julia's talk is called Laundering AI. So we're going to get into the dirty aspects and the clean aspects of AI. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Over to you, Julia.
AI has escaped the lab, a man-made product of computational engineering. It began with an outbreak in San Francisco, California, rapidly spreading worldwide in late 2022. AI symptoms for the academy range from asymptomatic to existential, but most commonly include disorienting and forcing effects from poor ambient conditions, peers, and decision-making institutions. My provocation proposes that in the face of these forces, academics and academic institutions are fast being dragooned into the exercise of laundering AI. I use the metaphor of laundering advisedly, as well as the invocation of a virus, perhaps ill-intentioned, seemingly spreading without resistance. I want to talk about why we might be laundering AI, how and what we are laundering, and what we might do instead. So why? What is very interesting to me is that the very people who 5-8 years ago, all over LinkedIn and other platforms, were proclaiming blockchain, NFTs, distributed networks, suddenly now they're the protagonists of AI. AI, the new transformational, epoch-changing technology. It fascinates me because I think there's something very compelling in every generation in the idea that we are in the throes of progress. We are the people who are seeing the next transformational change. We desire to live in the future. And I want to trouble that notion because there's a lot about AI that is not particularly attractive for the future. I think we should beware of the breathless flourish that AI is or has transformed medicine, education, health, law. I see very little that has truly transformed. There's a component of each of those disciplines that might be transformed. Certainly if you have a library of amino acid sequences and a library of protein structures, it's very good to match the two. But anyone here who works in drug discovery would know that structures do not make miracle cures alone. Most drug discovery is not based on structure. It's based on all sorts of other serendipities of scientific research. So I think we should be aware of that instinct to give more to the technology than it deserves. I think we also should sit in the discomfort that the now and the tomorrow might not be all easy solutions and quick fixes. And AI promises certainty in an uncertain world, and that is part of its tremendous seduction. But there are no easy fixes, and there's certainly not easy fixes just from more information. I grew up in the time of genetics and bioinformatics and all of the many solutions that would bring, and there remain so many riddles of science that information alone does not solve. So I think we need to sit in the discomfort, remember the whiplash of the promises of technologies past. My particular grievance is with the claim that this is a democratizing technology, and I think we'll hear that through the various presentations. Is it truly democratizing to have a technology that can only be built by a handful of companies, where most of us are recipients of that technology building upon it? What are we laundering? And I'm a law professor, and I have studied technology firms for the last 15 years. And a large part of what they do is to operate on the outskirts of the law. A good example is the company Uber, whose very business model was to break the law to the point that it got too big to ban. And here in Australia, we've had a famous case where the very business model of Uber was challenged in Victoria on the basis that it was a tort of conspiracy. And they settled with taxi drivers because the very enterprise itself was a conspiracy to avoid the law to the point that they could become a scale monopoly at the scale that it outdid public transit and taxis and what have you. So I would argue that at the basis of this technology that we are laundering, there are some very significant illegalities. The technology is based on scraping the world's information. It is scraping the canons of literature, art, music, film and poetry without a care in the world for the fact that every country has a law of copyright and the artists were not consulted, were not compensated and have not given their consent. So it's an act of illegality that in our enthusiasm to see its outcomes, we are rapidly legalising. And I've spoken to 4 governments on the premise of whether their laws are now dust if they don't ask the very question, is this a legitimate product sourced lawfully from human information and from creative works. So at the basis of these technologies, there are some very serious questions from IP is one issue. Privacy is another very significant one. It's little known, but Meredith Whittaker, who was in the centre of that last slide, is actually doing a PhD in my research team on the question of whether AI is now the justification that warrants the lawless surveillance industry. The surveillance industry that has scraped your and my information for the last 15 years has a slam dunk in the idea that that was all worth it because of what AI will deliver based on our behavioural information. It's a grab that has continued for the last 15 years, and we are quickly endorsing its many virtues when we claim the virtues of AI. I want to propose that what is happening is actually what all the sci-fi has warned us about. I was having the conversation yesterday about gene technology. When Dolly the sheep and a ball of cells proposed the idea of cloning by by genetic means, 120 countries were able to recognise the ethical and legal risks from that development. 2 years ago, Facebook fully replicated in silico humans that can't recognise whether it is them in the machine or a simulation. And I don't hear anyone talking about cloning from these products that are able to siphon every part of our bodies, lives, thoughts and wishes. So theft, fraud and abuse, I would argue, are at the foundation of these models that we launder. And my final point is that there is a great momentum that is very seductive to the academy in ideas like our job is to encourage AI literacy, to seek responsible AI, and other seemingly attractive fields of research that conveniently go with the momentum of this industry. They require no confrontation with power, no challenge to the ways reordering lives and systems. And I think that what I would argue is that in fact we don't need a lot of literacy on scams, on fraud, on power imbalances, on extraction. What we need is to get to a point where we're able to reckon with the fact that our states have less power than many of the companies developing these technologies, and they need the muscle of people to ask the questions and demand answers of how we are, for example, dropping AI products in schools when you can't put a textbook in a school without 17 levels of approval. How can we put AI products untested, built on really problematic data sources in the mainstream of our educational system? So my particular toolkit for responding to AI is a simple mnemonic: power. I think we have to look at power. Who is behind these companies, and is anyone looking at them and the reach that they have? Second is oversight. Where is the oversight to match that power? At the heart of every AI system are workers and the environment. We're going to get into that. And there is the final element is redress. We're seeing very little redress from the proto-AIs, RoboDebt being paradigmatic example that are deployed on populations. So if you think on power, oversight, workers, environment and redress, it is unsettling perhaps for those in the academy, but I think it's a far more productive route than to be dragooned into the exercise of laundering these technologies.
Okay, thanks Julia, thank you very much. Tech pessimism, tech ethics, two simple things that jump to my mind, but I think if I just boil it down to those simple components. A very quick question, who would like to ask? Right here, you were first.
Please correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that under Australian law, downloading a pirated work is definitely not illegal. It's the uploading that is illegal, and so my understanding would be, well, ChatGPT have downloaded the pirated work. They're not distributing it, and so it's definitely not illegal. What Australian laws currently exist that we could say that we could use to say ChatGPT is breaking the law?
Yeah, so there's no downloading. This is because we don't want to penalise users of products that are illegal. So the downloading rule doesn't mean that the platform distributing the content is not illegal. In fact, it very much is. So that's the analogy. A file sharing platform like ChatGPT is the illegal party, not the end user. Now the rules when you use ChatGPT are that you absorb all of the liability and risk. Take note, at academic institutions, the user of the product under their terms of service absorbs that risk from the company. So they're playing loopholes in the law and a power game on some of those established principles.
And who here reads the terms of services when they download an app?
It would be
the App Store. Anyone?
It would be irrational to do so.
Okay, we're going to move along the line and over to Professor Zach Ammon. Zach, the floor is all yours.
Okay, so I see we have an age distribution in the audience, so I'm going to invoke Lawrence Welk and say for something completely different. I want to talk about a different type of power, and that is energy. Now, before I get into the discipline of energy, which is my technical background before we get to AI, and we're going to go on a journey through energy and net zero, and we're going to come back to AI, I want everyone to close their eyes for 10 seconds, and I'm going to ask you one question. How do you define energy? I was going to play Jeopardy music, but I don't know. Okay, open them up. Raise your hands. Does anyone feel as though you have an actual definition of energy you would take to the bank, that you would defend in court? Okay? So we have two. As a technical expert, I'll tell you, there is no definition of energy, right? The oldest definition that we rely on is the capacity to produce an effect. But there is no formal, static definition of energy. For instance, if Julie doesn't mind, Julia is high energy. The light bulbs are low energy. The car is an energy guzzler. Energy has a contextual definition, right? It is not an absolute definition. So now I want to talk about net zero, and I want to ask you a question. How can renewables be the cheapest form of energy when energy has no scientific definition? James said be provocative. All did too. So I provoke you with this, not that the form of renewables and a type of energy is not the cheapest, but we have a blanket statement like they are the cheapest form of energy. That statement is not scientifically defined. And this, when we go back to 2017, is the origin of our climate wars. And I note on what is very sadly one of the last Q&As last week, PK asked, is this the start or the end of the climate wars? And it looks like it's actually the start. So this is deeply concerning to me, right? Because we look at what's happened. Where do we go back to in 2017? This was the inflection point at which solar photovoltaics produced more than they cost to make. Meaning that if you had an infinite investment from that point, you would have an infinite potential upside. Now, give me a show of hands. Do you think we've made good, not perfect, but good progress in Australia for net zero since 2017? Okay, I would argue that we have quite an uptake of renewables. Perth tends to run on 70 to 80% renewables on any given day. We're one of the exemplars in the world for a capital city. However, this now along comes a spider, right? In 2022, 2023, here comes AI. And when we look to developed economies who have deployed AI data centers, these are 10 times more electrically intensive than their pre-AI counterparts. So in fact, the amount of energy that we've pumped into the system in North America from renewables in the past 7 to 10 years, half of that has been consumed to now build AI data centers. Now I go back to why was this a problem to begin with? We invoked in the argument that we wanted to get rid of these companies doing something bad to us. We made it about the companies. We have plenty of sun, and once that becomes cost effective, we have an infinite ability to earn. We have plenty of wind. We have, for the most part, plenty of uranium, and even quite a bit of coal, oil, and gas if we carbon capture the back end of it, right? We have the technology. If we go back to 2007, George W. Bush's Department of Energy validated and pilot-scaled carbon capture on a coal plant. Do we have that conversation here? Absolutely not. That technology does exist, and the US federal government signed off on it. We chose not to build it because it would double the cost of our coal electricity, and no one wants that on their bank account. So, the reason when we go to 2017 and we start having these climate wars, we did not have a genuine conversation with each other about the problem. We had an argument about who was causing the problem. And that goes back to what James pointed out earlier, E.O. Wilson's, was it Paleolithic mind? We want to hurt someone who we think's done bad. We don't want to solve the intellectual problem on the table in front of us. And the challenge is because we did not frame that correctly, scientifically. We allowed our talking heads and politicians to take control of the argument, and they drove it on our behalf. So going back to AI, here comes these data centers, and now at least half of the progress that we've made is powering up these AI models. And in fact, 1% of the energy utilization goes to train them. It's not the training, it's the utilization. And we went from a very simple inferencing of a large language model 2 years ago to now large reasoning models. And anyone that's used OpenAI's deep research capability, this is now running thousands of inferences. I love it as a researcher. It's a very quick way to find information, but it is using ever more energy year on year. Now, why are we as a species, why do we fall into E.O. Wilson's trap of a Paleolithic mind? I actually go back to a 1798 paper by Sir Thomas Malthus, the Malthusian devil, that we as a species are the cancer on the planet instead of a product of it. Right? This shows up in the second and third industrial revolutions, and by golly, it showed up in the fourth. That we are the problem, we have to stop. Does anyone think we've actually dropped the amount of wood that we burn worldwide for energy since the first industrial revolution? We absolutely haven't. Have we decreased the amount of oil we consume from the second or third? No. We simply discover new energy resources and add them to our pile. So if the question on net zero was ever going to be feasible, it was about fixing the problem of every one of our energy sources. And I raise this, give me a sign if I'm over time. I raise this because we've just gone through another election where energy was one of 3 major issues that decided it. But we did not have a conversation about the legitimacy of the energy source. In North America, it is our left-leaning party that wants to build nuclear. Right? We allow this to become politicized on our behalf instead of having a scientifically legitimate conversation about how to get rid of emissions as quickly as humanly possible. Now, let me give you a highlight of where AI can help this argument. I appreciate what Julia has said about AI alone has not been the source of these discoveries, and I think that is entirely valid. It has led to a 45,000-fold increase in the amount of discovery for protein folding, and medicine itself is 5 times faster in adopting AI for patents than is the energy industry. So energy writ large is a decade or 2 behind medicine and medical research for the adoption of AI. And this is where we have an opportunity, because we got into an argument about electrification and called it energy, and that was our critical mistake. Thermal energy, right? We cannot use electricity to produce thermal energy efficiently, and the critical part that we've not talked about are the 10,000 materials that come out of every barrel of crude oil. Looking around, is anyone wearing a perfectly natural fiber that's undyed? Raise your hands. No? Well, that's a nice blue shirt, though. Right. So even the blue dye that goes into that cotton shirt, that is derived from crude oil.
You're looking at my shirt, you're not looking at my underwear.
Thank you. Right. So we have
Not the right type of provocation. Scholarly ones only.
So we have 10,000 products in our ecosystem. Everyone literally has it on their back today that physically is distilled out of a barrel of crude oil, and we have no replacement for that. And that is a really big problem. We cannot stop using oil for that reason. What we need is the ability to replace the manufacturing process not once, but 10,000 times. So looking at the underutilization of AI in the energy industry, the ability to discover and play with new processes and materials, this is one way I think we can actually get to net zero, but it will require all of us to come onto the page of understanding energy at its most foundational form. Thank you.
Look at that. Just a word that comes to my mind here is kind of an academic paradox, in the sense that we're being encouraged to use it. A lot of academics in the HAS space are critical, they're conscious of sustainability, but we're not being sustainable.
Yeah.
Okay. Question from the audience, please. Who would like direct a question to Zach?
Another
Prashant.
energy-intensive thing is Bitcoin and the mining, crypto. Now, both together is burning the planet.
Yes.
What's your view on that?
Because Paul and James asked me to be provocative,
Please.
I think Bitcoin itself is a terrible waste of our intellectual and energy capital. I know that we must always grow or die as a Western economy, and that's the framing that we're in. I think the idea of putting our faith in a cryptocurrency, I'm hoping that our colleagues in physics with quantum machines will quickly unravel that ball of yarn, because we need to be putting our best minds and our greatest energy towards something that we can actually measure the impact of.
And how well is your crypto portfolio working for you?
I can proudly say I have zero crypto.
Excellent. Okay, so we're going to move on to our third speaker, my colleague in the School of Social Sciences, Celeste Rodriguez-Luro. Celeste, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much. Hi everyone. We're moving from law to energy to language. I am a linguist, and that's not the only reason why my provocation is called AI has a language problem. So there are three ways in which language comes into the picture. We know that generative artificial intelligence is trained on large language models, or language models that, as was mentioned before, mostly scraped from the internet. We've got language, natural language as an interface between algorithms and the end user. And we also have the end user's linguistic ability that has been previously acquired to be able to make sense of the generated output. I wanted to ask you a brief question, and you're going to need to use your thumb for it. So I want to ask, how many of you are for generative AI and are using it potentially daily, weekly, have no qualms about it? You're kind of early adopters maybe, so that's a thumbs up. You can do a thumbs down if you're totally against it. And we've got a kind of like a middle option, a sideways thumb. So everyone keep that up for a while so I can have a bit of a look around. Wow, there's a lot of variability. Thank you. Put your thumb back down. Okay, so my provocation is around AI having a language problem. And there are three ways in which I'd like to tackle this. The first problem is that although we use generative AI every day and may think of English, for example, to take one of the many languages that we could be referring to, as neutral, a means of communication, something that allows us to understand the generated output, there's nothing neutral about language. Language is never neutral. It is always political. It is always entrenched in sociocultural structures, privilege, corporate interests, and so on. So when we look at the type of English, again I'm referring to English now, but it could be any other language, any other global language. So when we look at English, what kind of English is a technology based on? And what we know is that although the majority of English speakers around the world are L2 users of English, meaning they speak other languages in addition to English, the technology that you see when you use something like ChatGPT is the language is English based on American English. And American English is very much the variety of English, mainstream English, used by the developers of these technologies, say, around Silicon Valley. So that's one aspect to keep in mind, this sort of linguistic injustice of having a whole bunch of speakers of a language, in this case English, being kind of left out of the equation. And this is interesting when you look at voice cloning and things like automatic speech recognition. You know, if you've got something like what I'm wearing or any other device, you may want to use your voice to be able to ask that device to do things for you. And as it stands at the moment, only a very small number of people are able to do that easily. There are a lot of speakers of English who are unable to utilize their voice to get things done in the same way. So that's something to think about that relates to social injustice. The second aspect I wanted to talk about, which I love, is silence. Human beings use silence in interaction every day, every single time. You may not be aware of it, but we're socialized into being able to communicate using lexical items, words, so some of the stuff is lexicalized, but a lot of what we do is actually not conveyed through words. And silence plays a huge role. One of the things that I was quite worried about when I learned about this particular algorithm used in Spain, so it turns out that so if you're a domestic abuse victim and you've got the police come to your home to check with you whether the person who's been abusing you is likely to do so again, in those kinds of interactions, if you use an algorithm like the one that was being used in Spain, that algorithm is unable to understand the nuance around silence. So in this particular scenario, you've got someone who was the victim of domestic abuse being asked whether they thought the abuser was likely to consume substances again. And this person replied with silence. The algorithm read that as a non-yes, as a no. Okay, that was how it was being programmed to understand. And the human in the loop kind of went with the algorithm's decision rather than perhaps adding some of that nuance. And so this led to many of these victims finally passing away because the abuse was in reality escalating, although the algorithm had not really picked up on that. And that's because silence was not something that it was able to deal with. The third aspect I wanted to mention, and this is my last, hopefully within time still, is to do with the assumption that when we interact with generative artificial intelligence, the system, the generated text is not in any way based on intentional use of language in the same way that we use language. However, the end user assumes that there is a mind behind the system. So the system will generate text that is synthetic, that is based on the most likely next word, and the human user will assume that there is a mind behind that system. Why? Because we've evolved for millennia to actually interact through language with other human beings. And so that's important because if we assume a mind behind a system that we're interacting with, we're kind of losing some degree of objectivity as to what exactly it is we're interacting with. And last night I was attending a seminar and this presenter was talking about AI companions and AI girlfriends and AI boyfriends and so on. And I thought, that's interesting, this kind of language being used to label these technologies, to completely anthropomorphize the technology in a way that's potentially very dangerous. Yep. So something to think about as well. I'll leave it there. Hopefully that's what was within time. Thank you.
So, just kind of big buzzwords jumping into my head are kind of, I suppose, virtual reality, virtual artificiality, and that kind of fine line between the material and the ephemeral, you know, in terms of interacting with these systems and how we interpret them and how they interpret us and what we put on, what we project onto them, you know, and that kind of symbiotic relationship I think that we might be in. So, Gil, quick question.
Quick question. You have a strong technical energy background, but I have 2 honours degrees from this university in arts and letters, so I'm very aware of the nuances of language. And my question here, following up from last night about ground truthing on the one hand, but here coming into this random noise, the issue of people being trapped within limited vocabularies. Yeah.
So what's the question exactly? Whether people are trapped within limited
The consequences of that and the way they respond because they don't have the words or the life experience to wend their way out of it. They're trapped in there.
Vocabulary is an interesting aspect of language which theoretically can continue to expand forever as long as you're alive. So I'm not sure that I follow. I have read some publications on people concerned that the overuse of AI will change language in a way that will be unacceptable and then we'll forget how to use language appropriately. I don't buy into it necessarily because we're still interacting amongst humans. I mean, perhaps in a future where people stop talking to one another. But yeah, is that where you're going with that?
I know Paul, he runs a tight ship. We can expand
Yes,
that
we'll
later.
expand. Thank you very much.
So my reputation precedes me. I'm going to move on to our final speaker, and it's a delight to have Conrad Tucker from Carnegie Mellon University, Africa, with us. Conrad's a guest of Julia's and with the Institute for Advanced Studies Visiting Fellowship, and Julia is also hosting us here as well. So welcome to Perth, welcome to Forest Hall. Conrad's an engineer, so Conrad, over to you for your provocation.
Thank you very much, and good evening, everyone. Thanks for having me. So as an engineer, we typically start with the question of what problem are we trying to solve? And then we design a system to solve that particular problem. So the system itself becomes the intervention that changes either human behavior or human well-being. And so the irony, and we were asked to be provocative, is in this room, how many of you noticed that we're being recorded? Have we noticed? Okay. Now, how many people would wonder if the intervention of a recording changes the behavior of a free, open, provocative interaction? So I would argue that the mere fact that there's a technology intervention changes at least my behavior, because I have no idea where this recording is going. Ironically, it could be used, our voices and images can actually be used to retrain an AI model. But we're so used, that's the thing, we're so used to technology being around us that sometimes we fail to think deeply about its impact on our behavior. And so that's the starting point that I want to begin this conversation is how is the intervention itself changing human behavior? And what problem are we solving? So the overall framework that I wanted to talk about today is the mechanics of artificial intelligence and why it needs to be a global conversation. And so a lot of times when we think about AI, we think about the algorithm or the output of a ChatGPT. But it's actually a stack of hardware, GPUs primarily, to train these models. It's a network of fiber optics, in many cases, to transmit large amounts of data from one region to the next. It is energy to sustain the training of these models that sometimes take months to train. So when we think about, or when we talk about artificial intelligence, let's be reminded to think about the ecosystem and how the ecosystem impacts the final result. The second point I want to mention, there's a lot of talk about the ownership of regulating or who owns, and the question is, well, in this stack of GPUs and networks and data and models, who really has the cards? Who has the leverage to make decisions? So let's take Australia. The Australian government, for example, wanted to have the best AI model be auditable. And the company says, okay, fine, here's the trillion parameter model. It costs $10 million to retrain yourself and do as you wish in terms of auditing. But if they know that you don't have 6,000 GPUs to retrain the model, then maybe what that does is outsource the risk or the liability of training the model. You wanted a model audited? Here's a model. I know you can't audit it because you don't have the infrastructure to audit it. And so let's be reminded of thinking about the ecosystem for artificial intelligence and what it really would take to have these policies or guardrails around these technologies. I'd like to end with just this parallel that we have going on. So some have argued that AI is going to either replace jobs or augment human work, or for those who lose their jobs, they will reskill and just learn to do something else. So let's play this scenario out. 10 years ago, we didn't have these AI capabilities of generating language that was convincing enough to have a dialogue. And we are where we are now. So imagine someone loses their job in programming, and they want to switch careers from programming to chemistry. How many years will that take for that individual to be retrained and re-educated? And in parallel, how long would it take for AI to develop the capabilities for that job that this human is training for? And so if the rate at which the human is able to learn these new skills for a new job is not outpacing the AI, then we may end up in this loop of chasing that which is unattainable. So with that, again, thank you very much for the opportunity, and I'm looking forward to more dialogue. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Conrad. Quick question for Conrad.
I'll pose one. You mentioned quickly about, does a country has a capacity or capability to, find out if how the model was trained. So that raises a very serious question about sovereign capability. There's only one company, and which basically rules the whole thing. So if you go back to a steam engine, every country can have their own engine. Now the engine is somewhere else. Only one person controls what goes into that, and we are just consuming it. So what is the risk for a country size of Australia if we don't have sovereign AI and sovereign cyber capabilities?
I mean, I think the risks are, so let's, the parallel I wanted to draw, we have a duopoly when it comes to air travel. So Boeing and Airbus primarily are the two main.
Yeah.
So Australia doesn't have sovereignty when it comes to aircraft manufacturing. Why is it that we have a reduced sense of concern when we have these very few companies that are, in essence, controlling the supply chain for air travel, but when it comes to AI, there's this elevated concern. I think we need to be realistic that every country can't have sovereignty of every AI model. And so in the absence of that, what have we done for other technologies where sovereignty isn't absolute for a country, and can those policies be leveraged so that it reduces the concerns that, again, it goes back to what problem are we solving? If the problem is potential risks to people, then how do we work backwards and solve it?
Thank you.
Thanks, Prashant.
Sorry, can I extend to that? Is there an institution?
Quickly, yes, by all means.
education is the problem, and that's why the sovereignty needs to be 100% accurate for our country.
Can you elaborate when you say education, lack of knowledge of AI?
It goes back to what Julia, sorry, I've got that wrong, was saying at the beginning. If our children were bringing AI into primary schools, and yet it's been trained on a US-based language model, how will those children learn in our country, or any country for that matter? It'll all be US-based. So as they go through the education system, that's where it's important.
I think the geopolitics mean that
Correct.
there'll be a Chinese model and there'll be an American model, and there may be a Russian model, which no one understands.
Well, the Russians will understand.
Yeah. Just
That's
the
enough, right?
And the Martians. The Martians will understand all of it. So well, I'm just going to pose a couple of broad questions to the panel for general feedback, and then I'm going to come out to you. And I can see that you're already chomping at the bit, basically. And your question there about education kind of resonates with my first question to the panel. So the title for our session today was From Academic Intelligence to Artificial Intelligence, right? And the provocation in that is an implicit one, is, around the concerns about the impacts, positive and negative, about AI on teaching, learning within universities, and the development of, what a graduate student, comes out at. So Celeste, could I maybe just start with you on this one, because we're in the same school and you've been kind of discussing an awful lot about this. So, high level, are we right to be concerned about let's call it the dumbing down of education? Is AI going to lead to a dumbing down of university education?
Yeah.
Is it contributing?
Thank you. I think there are usually two camps. Some people say, absolutely not, AI is a tool, we've had other tools around, it's just a matter of knowing how to use it, and so on. And then there are other people who are quite concerned that the value proposition of a university, for example, which is to prepare people, to teach people, to be able to make them ready for the workforce, will simply not be the same. My main concern about that is how do we ensure that people who have gone through the system at a given university, how do we make sure that we are able to tell that those people have actually learned the material that they paid money to learn, if all of our assignments are, say, take-home assignments that we know potentially everyone is using ChatGPT to do. And so then we've had discussions around, do we need more invigilated assessment, for example, so that people get to write down the answers and we know for sure that they're not using generative AI and so on. It's a tricky one. At the beginning of this journey, as Zach may remember, I was very much of the opinion that unless you're running invigilated assessment, there's no way to tell that people have not cheated their way through the assignment. Nowadays, I feel like what we need to be learning and teaching is critical thinking. And I think it goes back to what Julia was presenting at the very beginning. I don't know that we necessarily must convey knowledge in the same way that we needed to do it as professors before the internet. When, remember the times, some of you will remember, you had to actually take yourself to a library, find the books, open up the book and locate the information. Book was out. You had to wait for 2 weeks. We were okay with that. And this is just so quaint and wonderful. But that's no longer the world we live in. And so if that's no longer the case and you can obtain this information elsewhere, why are you attending university? And I think critical thinking is where it's at. Knowing about the technology, knowing why we need a technology, what's the energetic cost of it, what are my options around this. I thought it was wonderful that you said you Googled all of the words that contained AI, and I thought this is so wonderful because maybe a younger person would have used ChatGPT to get to the same point. And so just to be mindful of the trade-offs and so on. So I would say it's really critical thinking where it's at. That's what we should be developing in students. I'll let my colleagues.
Zach, do you want to chip in there? You look like you want to say something.
Yeah, in the sense that this is not the first time I've heard that concern, and I think it's a valid one, and a lot of people in the community have it for all the right reasons. In higher education, we are regulated by a large number of bodies, starting with the federal government, working down through all of our professional accreditation bodies. I think at UWA we have at least 50, if not more. The beneficial part is that these bodies are now starting to look at AI with a critical lens. So as of next year, our federal accrediting body will expect us to have a regulatory approach to AI in the classroom addressing exactly this risk. This year, the first of our professional accrediting bodies expected us to start teaching machine learning outside of the discipline of computer science, right? Teaching it in an allied engineering discipline because they appreciate the need for students to understand both the fundamentals and the deployment of the technology. So the same bodies that have helped us migrate through the previous industrial revolution and the waves of technology coming thereafter are continuing to follow their practices, and they themselves are following industry. So in a way, I'm not terribly concerned. I think there are questions inside the academy of exactly what mechanisms we'll use, but I'm not fearful that we won't find an answer. The beneficial part, I think, is our guiding stars that we have always followed are continuing to focus on this and point us in the right direction.
Okay, my second question, and I'm going to aim this towards Julia and Conrad, because just thinking about what you've all said, and I suppose there's an illusion here that we're sleepwalking into AI, in a sense, right? Or we're in it and we're sleeping within it, okay? Can we game it from outside? Can we game this AI ecosystem from an engineering critical knowledge as active human agents, or from a kind of think about it through a socio-legal lens? You know, so I'm looking for tips and advice for everybody so that we can game the system to our advantage. Is that possible?
I mean, my starting point is, I think I totally refuse the idea that we're in it and it's already there. I think as soon as we surrender to inevitability, you lose most of your chips in the game. And we are in the middle of an experiment. And I know this because I'm a contemporary of Sam Altman. I know lawyers in all of the firms that are developing these AI products. A bare 3 years ago, they were not releasing these products because they were illegal. And one guy flew the coop with a product, the world went nuts, and everyone else followed because it's a competitive industry. That doesn't mean we all have to, when we're not the beneficiaries of that gamble, accept that this is the status quo. So I truly think that keeping that possibility that we actually do have a say in whether or not this technology is the environment we're enclosed within or not is key. And I just wanted to offer one angle, sort of connecting it back to the previous question, which is, I think, a really insightful one. Many of us have actually been thinking about these technologies for a long time. This is just kind of, it's hit that mass inflection point. And one is Emily Bender, computational linguist, and she has this really interesting way of thinking about when AI gets used by students or by professors, that it really illuminates another problem. This goes to what problem we're trying to solve. So when students use these tools, they are shortcutting their own learning journey, but why are they doing it? They're doing it because they're not engaged. They're doing it because they've got too much other work to do. They're doing it because they're anxious about their futures. And that is a diagnostic about a resource limitation of some kind. The educational journey is failing in some way. When professors use it, it's because we're all too busy. We don't have support. All of the professional services have been dumped on academics. You know, again, it's a diagnostic on what is changing in our environment. But it also requires us to bring in these features that are uncomfortable, like you say about energy. And I've found it remarkable in classrooms, students, you know, from 8 to 15, they just need to hear that these products are, we haven't talked at all about the labour that goes into the supply chains of creating AI products. Just to be able to do a quick query on ChatGPT, people need to sit in data labelling centres and in human feedback loops where they are exposed to the most heinous material online. It's you know, really despicable work conditions. It creates long-term PTSD. And by the way, just to do that little query is draining the water supplies of cities. It's using, you know, it's reversing our gains on the climate. So that is the other piece of it, the kind of activation of what we, remembering what we know, and bringing that into the same conversation. What are we shortcutting it all for? What are we trying to jump in those, reaching for, I think, the quick fixes?
Conrad, do you want to follow up on that in some way? As an engineer?
Well, I have a more neutral view, not as pessimistic view. I think we have to accept, especially in academia, that technologies are going to, I mean, it's actually surprising that academia has had a monopoly on knowledge dissemination for this long. I mean, think about how many organizations or industries have had a monopoly that don't even exist anymore.
Yeah.
Academia has had the monopoly on knowledge dissemination and knowledge creation since its formalization. And we can kick and scream, but we're surrounded by these technologies. So the question is, how do we adapt? I don't think it's a fad. I think we need to just adapt, and even if we wanted to change the academic system from this obsession with assessments and quizzes and to a critical thinking. Think about you go to your department head, pitch this idea, then it gets to a committee, and then a bunch of faculty discuss, and then it comes back to you and say no, and then you do. Think about the bureaucracy that we've established in this system to even do the things that you are proposing to do. So I think it's a moment of reckoning. We have to look at ourselves in the mirror as academics and think about what this opportunity presents for us to change.
Okay, thanks, Conrad. Right, over to you. I see you're not going to get another chance. You've had 2 questions per chance. So there's a question. I see Alistair in his hand there, and then I'll come here. So Alistair.
Yeah, okay, it's slightly complicated, but it's been a fascinating discussion. Thinking about educating students, both Australian and global, and thinking about some of the things that have been raised. I think this is for Conrad, but maybe for Julia as well. You know, Australia is a colonial inheritor of systems, with energy systems, technology systems, language systems, knowledge systems. First Nations people know this, legal systems. And thinking about that last point regarding the centrality of AI, I'm kind of reminded of, have we gone to post-colonial too early? Are we actually in a new kind of AI-fueled, knowledge-based colonialism, which is degrading the nation state, as we so fond of, in ways that are going to create new challenges for us going forward?
An easy question for the panel.
Since your camera guy didn't get the hints, I can only respond in a not as provocative way as I would like.
You're in a safe place.
Okay. The question, well, what are the alternatives? Again, we have GPUs. I know that Julia doesn't want us to throw our hands up and I think if it's framed as a battle, I don't know how productive that is.
Colonialism is a battle,
Yes, but why that analog to begin with? Why are we even approaching it with this antagonistic viewpoint? I mean, aircrafts pollute the environment significantly, a significant amount, but we find value in it, and we do a cost-benefit analysis of airplanes and airports and just the ecosystem of environmental impact in that industry. But I think we should. It's tempting to approach this in an antagonistic or fearful way, and it's very valid. But the question: how productive is that? What is our end goal? What is the problem that we're trying to solve? And is that posture conducive to getting there?
If I can just quickly add to that, and building on Conrad's point, I appreciate the deep desire to want to look at nuanced questions from a moral lens. And in fact, it becomes very easy to look at it from a binary moral lens when we can group our friends and colleagues into one or the other. You are for or against my moral point. And we as human beings love doing that. If you go back to Yuval Harari's book, Sapiens, that is how we build communities and spread myth. That is our one evolutionary trait. We are really, really good at doing that, right? The same approach was taken with energy in 2017, and how well did we do? We didn't, right? All the progress we made has been wiped out, more or less. So when we approach these nuanced questions, I think Conrad's counterpoint is exactly right. To what end? Instead of debating the morality of the choice in front of us, can we not debate how we get to the best future possible and actually try to myth make less, try to congregate with the group we want to associate with less, and more with the people we intrinsically disagree with?
Can I give a quick, let me give a defence of this analysis. So there's been 15 years of scholars really looking at the idea of data colonialism, this kind of empire of AI. The popular book out at the moment, bestseller from Karen Howe, who's one of the best journalists in technology, Empires of AI, on Sam Altman's OpenAI. So I think it's a very powerful analogy. I am equally critical of it as an endpoint, to just name it. I think there's value in naming what's going on. And I do think it's quite distinct, because the empire in this instance is built on the extraction of information from all of us. And the way I like to think about this in thinking about these companies is, it's not like there's this big company out there and, you know, we're over here off the map. These companies and how they operate is because we're all providing the information on which they depend. And we are constantly nourishing that information. If we didn't continue to use these services, they wouldn't be so useful. Just like search, just like any of the surveillance-based products. So there's an imbalance there that I think we should be uncomfortable about, because it's totally extractive. And, you know, my theory is we're actually in quite the dark ages on the kind of interest we have in that particular power imbalance. The interest we have is that while our bodies are our sovereign property in a way we can't sell but we can exercise autonomy over, our information is absolutely not that. Our information is tradable without any recompense. And so there's something there that is really ill in our legal systems, in our ethical codes, that is very intuitively felt by people. This is why people say that is mine, that's my information. And how we have transited the physical world is that there is just a practical limit to how much people can retain of you as you navigate physically. Digitally, it's a totally different equation. So there's a kind of disconnect there. It goes back, I think, very deeply to what you can see and what you can't see. And what you can't see, we just don't have as good mechanisms for being able to rebalance in the way that I think would address the instinct that is very widely held. And that's why people say, you know, let's find the good in this, because that's not a comfortable place to sit in. But I think it's a productive one.
So we've got pessimistic optimists and optimistic pessimists on the panel, I think. Maybe if I've got that right and summarising it, synthesising it. Question from here. If you can tell us who you are and who your questions for.
For me, hi, I'm Fiona. I'm one of the Forrest Fellows. I work in physics, but kind of statistics, philosophy of science as well. I'm a pessimistic pessimist, I think. That's going to come across this question.
Oh, what a combination that is.
She said thumbs down. Yeah.
Yeah, so my question is, what is unique about AI that's pushed us to this reckoning point? Because I've kind of got two examples that I want to pick on. One was this sort of idea that language is not neutral. Well, I don't disagree, but we use language to communicate as humans. So what about AI kind of makes it a problem that we need to actually begin addressing? And then, also talking about this idea of critical thinking. And I guess it worries me that we're saying, well, the antidote to this proliferation of AI in terms of student use is to teach critical thinking. But shouldn't we have already been doing that? Like, does that not suggest that AI is just kind of colonizing the corpse of the academy? So what is unique about AI that we didn't have with the advent of the internet, for example? Why are we being pushed this time? What's the property that we need to care this time.
If I may, the property is that it can generate essays, letters of reference, scripts, movies, all sorts of things in seconds. I mean, that was not available, and that's and the language interface as well. It's very accessible. You can ask it, literally just tell it to do something and it will. So I think the language interface is what's genius about it. It's just very accessible to the human mind, almost addictive, potentially. And we were already addicted to the digital life through social media and so on, and that's where the huge data extraction started, not now, decades ago, when we were thinking that, oh, this is wonderful, I'm sharing my photos on Facebook, but there you go. And the bulk of information that goes up daily, just from the US, I think it's 350 million photos posted daily on Facebook, just in the US. It's a lot. So I think language, I would say that interface, very powerful. One of the reasons why when people say, hey, this is like when the calculator became available, and for me, that's just a no-go area, because a calculator does not use lateral language as an interface. You cannot tell it to write a play in the style of Shakespeare or whatever. It just won't do it for you. It's very domain specific. You kind of need to hire people to do your work, which unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, generative AI is very different. Your second question about shouldn't we already have been teaching students critical thinking? Absolutely. But I think it's reflective of the systemic. So the university, once upon a time, you were able to take a class where the professor would be sitting around a table with maybe 5, 6, 10 students maximum, and that began to, those classes began to grow and grow and grow, and eventually you were assigning work to be done at home, and then you would be marking that and so on. And so critical thinking, whilst I think if you're a good teacher, critical thinking is forever baked into your teaching. There's no way you can teach well without teaching people to think critically. I think now we need to become more intentional because of how controversial this is, because of how extractive this technology is, because of the ghost work that goes into cleaning it up for consumption, and people are being paid $2 an hour in parts of Africa and Venezuela and so on to do this work. And so that's the critical piece. But you have a point. I mean, we should have been teaching critical thinking all along.
I just add in there, universities have gotten to the point, and I think maybe describe universities as one of their jobs is to prepare people for work. Mm-hmm. But going back to when universities had 8 or 10 people, that wasn't their job, really. Universities have become factories to produce people to do jobs that needed some level of thinking, but critical thinking wouldn't have helped because you needed someone to become an accountant, and they just needed how to apply systems and think of the rules, not critically think necessarily. Because the commercial value, what the federal government was going to pay for, was that outcome. Now, if critical thinking truly does have value, then that's how the universities can get funding, is if they can demonstrate the value, the dollar value, to industry in doing so. And that's where it moves beyond the realm. Like energy can't be described. The value of money is a notion and an idea, but it does come down to a hard transaction at the end of the day, and that's where critical thinking has come back to a valuable commodity, perhaps.
Thank you.
The regulators are always late to the scene. The last to arrive. If you had to point to the 5-alarm fire that the regulators ought to get onto first in this story, where would it be?
So the US Federal Trade Commission, 3 years ago, had a very substantial proposal on banning behavioural surveillance. If you seriously went down that track, you would change the business model on which these companies are built. And they weren't, there was under the now replaced FTC Commissioner who understood about the power of monopolies and the base of those particular monopolies. So I think it's go to the heart of the business model, the source of the power that is unchecked. And
So stopping them forming the giant database.
yeah. And then we could, I mean, I'm all for the kind of AI that I actually think would be productive, which is not these massive general models, but bespoke models that actually solve our problems. And I just really want to speak to, none of this is costless. Everything that we're putting to AI, we're not putting into the things that we actually know would work. That's what's so problematic about it, you know. So many social problems are expensive, they require people. I think it's so interesting that this particular, we've had this thread of like, we can't even imagine getting past the bureaucracy of a department in a university, and yet we think AI is going to just bulldoze everything. So there's something fascinating in that, the things that we think are breakable and those that aren't, and how much, I guess, we're conditioning ourselves to manufacture people who don't challenge those very systems that we should.
And how quickly we remove ourselves from the equation. How quickly we say, that's my main point actually, that instead of celebrating and being aware of human talent and all of the wonderful things that we've been able to do and will continue to do, immediately we're just giving it away. And robo-therapists are a very good example of this. I mean, the loneliness epidemic, sorry if I may just share this, because it was quite shocking last night, again, the seminar I attended. Amongst Stanford University students alone, 53% of them described feeling loneliness in their lives, and were also reporting using Replica, which is an agent AI, to share their problems with them, and sometimes the same agent, AI agent, was being used both as a boyfriend or a girlfriend and a therapist and a teacher, and because of course it's a disembodied entity, it can be anything. Very interesting. And then they the presenter moved to sort of be outside of Stanford to the US more generally, and the loneliness epidemic, those numbers went up to 90%. People saying, I just feel lonely. And so I think it's really dangerous then to go, well, then just, an AI agent will help. But then the flip side of that is that some of the people who described feeling lonely and had used Replica began to feel a little bit less lonely as they interacted with this agent, and eventually tried to find a group of humans to hang out with. It's as though they were trying it out with the AI agent and then joining this group, that maybe they were struggling with anxiety or shyness or whatever. But that's a very good example of, okay, loneliness, AI agent or AI girlfriend. What else could it be? Yeah, all sorts of agents to help out. You have problems at school? AI agent, instead of paying human teachers a decent salary so that they are able to deliver what they're meant to, or just hire more teachers. And so I think that's the problem. And that relates to something that Julia was referring to at the beginning, which is this obsession with the future, this obsession with what's coming to the detriment of what's actually happening. That is almost unethical sometimes. So that's important to bear in mind as well.
Gil, a quick question.
Can I just come back to your ground truthing and back to what you were saying? With a strong technical background, you said before, we don't know how to define energy, but we do understand the laws of thermodynamics. We do understand magnetic, electromagnetic spectrum. We do know how to harness and control and utilise energy without having to specifically name what energy is, right? So that's part of my argument about bringing the discourse from that broad understanding that we can proceed without actually having to name something back down, oh, we can't do it because we can't name it. My background, because we're coming from the bush, we're country people. I was taken through Kalama, through Indigenous law 10 years before I came to university. I've had my name, my granny, my totem. I sit here listening to people doing welcome to country. I wouldn't do that. Where are our elders that I consent for allowing me to speak on their country? They're not here, so why would you bother? Right? It just becomes an abstraction. Now, all the way through my academic career, it's constantly trying to bring ground truth theory But all we run into all the time is bureaucracy and government and regulations and imported and academics coming here from overseas who have no comprehension of our real life lived experience in the Australian outback and the problems that we face on a day-to-day basis that we simply cannot get addressed. And then on top of that, impose this internet and AI and computers and things like that. Next
Question.
thing, into our community.
Get to the question. Let's get to the question.
My question is, just this next bit, because this is the crux of the thing. The federal government sends a bloody army in to supervise people that they previously sent computers to. And they're looking at all this stuff that the computers delivering on the internet. Oh, look at this stuff, look at all these guardians, you know, what are they doing, you know? But they're arresting them and putting them in jail and prescribing them and criminalising them. When years before that, what we want to do, and Judith Kieran's in the psychology department was the key leader in this area, is understand this ground truthing cognition as a point of reference for anything that happens beyond that. That's my question is, how did we get to that point where we lost contact with that? It's become so abstract and that's become criminal.
Okay, you've asked the question. Conrad, do you want to try and respond to it? This concept of ground truthing?
How do we, as a society or humanity, slowly evolve to our own versions of truth? I think we did it ourselves. I mean, we went down a path of personalization, customization, and here we are. There's a technology that can meet our individual needs, and I think it's going to be very difficult to unplug from that, because in the same way that no one's forcing anyone to use. I've been listening to this conversation, and we don't. I mean, there's sweatshops for our clothes. They're conglomerates for energy. You know, why we haven't even solved those problems, and here we are discussing AI and issues. So let's be, at the very least, let's be consistent in the way that we're applying our.
Yes, but if I may, the sweatshops for our clothes, the people there are not exposed to traumatizing content.
Have you seen the YouTube videos of iPhones getting made? I mean, it's
yeah,
I wouldn't want to work.
Absolutely, but you know, I guess it's already wrong. Should we add more layers of wrongness to it? That's kind of like the point here. But you also say that it's already happening. But is that justification enough for it to continue?
It's not that it's necessarily already happening. We still buy phones every year. I don't see the I don't see the outcry of technology. You know, we seem to. I mean, raw materials are extracted in Africa and other parts. I'm not seeing the outcry of the supply chain. Again, we focus on AI at the very last end of it, of the output of text. But there's an entire pipeline that includes raw material extraction that, again, I'm just asking for consistency in how we apply morality and
That's the wrong species you've got there.
Very quickly, Zach, and then we've got one question in the back. Just hold on, Zach's going to respond, and then I'll come to you, sir.
I'm really glad that Gil mentioned the laws of thermodynamics, of course, because these are the only two laws that Einstein felt would never be overturned after he wrote general and special relativity, right?
Yeah.
So the first law of thermodynamics I also like to present in a way that Stranger in a Strange Land's Robert Heinlein wrote. There is no free lunch, or my rephrasing, there is no free lunch. So, you know, we become so accustomed in Western society to the use of price points to indicate quality and heritage of a product that we are salivating when we think we found a deal, right? Maybe we're doing some creative accounting, as it were. The issue is that there is no free lunch, there is no deal. Fashion that costs you $7 is not fashion, you pay for it somewhere. And what we've done is to shove all of that upstream and say we're going to mine or utilize some location or place or people and extract everything we can to sell a shirt for $7 that's going to disintegrate tomorrow. Going back to the question on Bitcoin mining, This type of behavior I find pathetic and disgusting. This is not modernity, because there is no free lunch. So I personally, I look to buy the most expensive quality product I can that I can use the longest, and then amateurize that over the greatest period, right? Don't buy one stove for $1,000 that's gonna last 5 years. Buy the most expensive stove you can afford, taking everything out of your life. No more coffees, no more iTunes subscriptions, no more Netflix subscriptions, right? With the hope that that enameled stove will last you 50 years like they used to. And I think that's one major step we as consumers have agency over that we can take.
What a skill. Gentlemen, right at the back, will take me the last question.
I just wondered what the panels, if you're teaching, what percentage of your assessments are individualized? I just wanted to make it more specific. It's been very theoretical, and I don't feel we've really covered the challenge in teaching at the moment that you told me about.
In linguistics, 50%, between 40 and 50% of the final mark comes from invigilated final exam. We're very final exam heavy, we've always been. So that's, I guess, good news. I'm not sure about other disciplines.
If I could maybe just chip in on here. I was speaking to a colleague last week, former colleague at UWA who's now over at Curtin, and they're pivoting to doing basically mini oral exams. So it's, you know, it's, call it an undergrad viva if you want to look at it that way, and it's interviewing students. You get 15-20 minutes, you know, and you run through the class and you interview them about what they've learned during the semester or whatever, basically, in that way. So my kind of gut says we're going to see a little bit of a pivot in assignments, you know, but the implication of it will be how will schools, faculties, universities respond in terms of the resourcing of that, you know, and then the implications it has for things like workload models. So we're going to have to really think outside the box. If we decide to pivot and we pivot significantly, it's going to have major ripple effects.
Just get AIs to do it.
Michael Small, director of the Data Institute, of course, you know.
Any other members of the panel?
I think I see some discussions about more milestone assessment. So
I was asking about you guys specifically rather than.
well, I don't. All of my assessments are in person, so I particularly encourage an ethical response from students to how they engage with various possibilities at their fingertips. One of the particular avenues that come from that is the very interesting educational experience that comes when you're in a regulated profession, where to be found to use to engage in plagiarism is something that will stay with you through your career, and that I find as a disciplining reality quite significant to have very good behaviour among our students. That the very prospect of it is such that they sometimes even self-declare their own instincts towards potentially cheating before they've engaged in it. So I think having, you know, students want to take responsibility for their learning journey if given the opportunity, and we don't, because of the pressures of the educational environment, have a lot of space for that. And I think we need to make more space for it. We need to do more co-design in assessment. So, I mean, that's how I do it, but I have the luxury of not having hundreds of students in any given class, where I think your dynamics are such that you just have no choice but to, you know, get in the cat and mouse game of AI systems and detection.
So for my engineering classes, somewhere between 70 and 80%.
So I taught a robotics course this past semester, and it was more project-based. And I remember given the project assignment of the students had to design and create a robotic arm that could cook a very specific type of African dish that hadn't been done before. I remember they came to me frustrated, how do we do this? And I said, I don't know. No one's ever done it before. And they were frustrated. But fast forward to the end of the semester, you had different versions of this solution, and they actually solved the problem. So I think it's just moving more towards these challenge problems that there aren't these previous solutions to homework assignments.
What was the African meal?
It's called jollof rice. If you ever jollof rice, very delicious.
Okay, look, I'm going to draw proceedings to a close. I want to thank our panel for their provocation. I want to thank you for coming out and engaging with us, and hopefully we'll see you at the part 2 and part 3 of this AI series. I want to thank James and his team here. We at the PPI, have a great collaborative working relationship with the Forrest Foundation. It's always great to come into this space because James makes it feel very convivial. I know he works with his Forrest Fellows and stuff. He makes it like a living room. It makes it feel like a home space, as much as a work space and a thinking and an intellectual space. So thank you to Jenny, who's out there. I can see still here from the Forest. So a big thank you to them as well. So I'm going to draw final notes, and then we can socialise, a bit of networking for a little bit, and thank you once again, everybody. Okay.